Did you kiss me while I was unconscious?" The horse went down in the dry wash, and the man went with it, and neither of them got up right away. Calla had been watching from the ridge. She'd seen the rider push too hard across the loose shale, seen the animal's front legs buckle in that particular way that meant the leg or the chest, and she'd already started moving before the dust cleared. It was 300 yards down the slope. Her feet knew the way. She had grown up on this land, and the land had grown into her. She reached him before the horse stopped moving. The animal had a gash along its shoulder, long and bleeding but not deep, not the end of it. The man was on his back with his eyes closed and a cut across his temple leaking into the dirt. His hat was gone somewhere. He was large, which was a problem, and he wore the clothes of a cowhand, which was information. His rifle had skittered 10 feet away. She left it there. She put 2 fingers to his throat. The pulse was there, strong enough. She looked at the sky. The afternoon was going fast, and the wash gave no shelter once the temperature dropped. It was already dropping. She could feel it on the backs of her hands. There was a decision to make. She made it. It took her the better part of an hour to get him up the slope to the overhang she knew, half carrying, half dragging, stopping twice when her knees gave out under his weight. The horse followed without being asked. Animals were practical that way. She built a fire with the dry cedar she'd cached there in the fall and got water from her skin into him slowly, tilting his head, watching his throat work. He swallowed. That was good. She cleaned the gash at his temple with the water and tied it with a strip cut from the inside of her saddlebag. She had no poultice here. She would manage. He came around sometime after dark. His eyes opened and found the fire first, then the ceiling of rock above him, then her. She was sitting across the fire tending the small flame. She watched his hand move toward where his gun should have been. "It's there," she said, "on your right." He found it with his fingers and did not draw it. His eyes stayed on her. "You fell," she said. "Your horse went down on the shale." He was quiet for a moment. His hand left the gun. "How long?" he said. His voice was rough with it. 3 hours. He tried to sit up and made it halfway before he stopped. He put his hand to his head and looked at what came away on his fingers. "You did this," he said. It was not a question exactly. "The bandage, yes." He looked at her for a long time across the fire. She let him look. She had learned a long time ago that letting men look their fill at the beginning cost nothing and purchased a great deal. "Calla," she said, "that's my name." He said his own name, Cole. She noted it and set it aside. "Your horse is tied," she said. "The shoulder is cut, but it'll hold if you don't push him for a few days." Cole said nothing to this. He lay back down and looked at the ceiling, and after a while his breathing evened out and she thought he'd gone to sleep. She put another piece of cedar on the fire. The smoke went up and out through the crack in the rock where it always went. "Thank you," he said. She didn't answer. The fire said enough. By morning he could sit up on his own and eat the dried meat she offered without asking what it was. She took that as a good sign. Men who asked too many questions about food were men who had not been hungry enough yet to know what mattered. The cut on his temple had crusted over in the night. She looked at it in the morning light and it looked well enough. He would have a scar there. He already had 2 others on that side of his face, one along the jaw and one below the ear, both old and well healed. She noted this without comment. "Where were you headed?" she said. "Chilaro Basin, cattle work." She knew the basin. 60 miles south, 2 days on a sound horse, 3 on a horse with a shoulder wound. She said none of this. He would work it out himself or he wouldn't. She began breaking camp. She shook the bedroll she'd given him and rolled it and tied it without looking at him. She heard him get to his feet behind her, the careful sound of a man testing his balance. "I need to pay you," he said, "for the supplies." "No." "The bandage, the water." "No." She tied the bedroll to her saddle. Behind her, the sound of him moving to his horse, speaking to it low. She turned and watched him check the shoulder wound. He did it carefully with the flat of his hand first to feel the heat, then his fingers along the cut's edge. He knew horses then, or had learned to. When he was done, he stood and looked at the land below the ridge. The morning was clear and the distance was visible in that particular way it got in cold weather when you could see farther than seemed reasonable. She saw him calculating. The basin. The miles. "You can't push him," she said. "I know it. There's a line camp 7 miles south. The Argello family. They'll let you rest the horse." He turned and looked at her. His eyes were the color of worn denim, used and washed many times. "You know this country," he said. "Yes." He nodded, looked at the land again. She swung up into her saddle. Her own way was east, toward the canyon she'd been checking for sign of the man she was avoiding, which was a separate matter and none of his concern. She settled into the saddle and looked down at him. He was looking up at her. "Did you kiss me," he said, "while I was out?" She looked at him. "I saved your life," she said, "cowboy." A pause. Something moved across his face, brief as a cloud shadow. "All right," he said. She turned her horse east. She did not look back, but she heard him moving behind her, heard him mount, heard the sound of the horse picking its way carefully down the shale, and she did not urge her own animal faster, and after a time the sound of his hooves was simply part of the sound of the morning. The canyon was empty of the sign she'd feared and full of the sign she expected. Deer, one coyote, water still running in the North Fork. She spent 2 hours there, checking, and then came back out onto the flats and found Cole sitting in the shade of a juniper, his horse cropping at the dry grass beside him. She pulled up. "Argello camp is that way," she said and pointed south. "I know it," he said. "I waited." She looked at him. He looked back. His hat was found again. It had been in his saddlebag the whole time, she supposed, and it sat on his knee. "Why?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "You went into the canyon alone." She understood then. He had thought there was danger there. He had thought she might need something. She did not know what to do with this. She filed it. "There wasn't anyone," she said. "No," he said. "I could see that from here." She dismounted and loosened her horse's cinch and let him graze beside Cole's animal. It was noon, and the shade of the juniper was the only shade for a mile. She sat with her back against the tree, on the other side of the trunk from him, and ate the last of her dried meat. After a while he said, "What were you looking for in there?" "Sign." "Of what?" She thought about how much to say. "A man," she said, "who I have reason to avoid." Cole was quiet. She heard him shift against the bark. "Does he know this country?" he said. "Not well, but well enough." "So far," she said, "well enough." She felt him thinking about this. He did not ask the man's name or what she had done or what he had done. He just sat with the information and held it. She noticed this. The wind moved through the juniper above them. The horses grazed in their slow way, moving a step, lowering their heads, moving another step. "My father taught me to read sign," she said. She had not meant to say it. It came out in the way things sometimes did, when you'd held them a long time and they simply found a door. Cole said nothing. "He was Ende," she said. "Apache. My mother was from Santa Fe." She waited for the thing that usually came next, the recalibration, the subtle shift in how a person held themselves when they were revising what you were. Cole said, "He taught you well. You moved through that shale yesterday without making a sound." She sat with that. The horses moved. The wind moved. She had not meant to say anything about her father, and she had, and the world had not changed in the way she'd expected it to. After a while she stood and tightened her cinch. "The Argello camp is 7 miles, she said. "I know. You should rest the horse there 2 nights at least." "I know that too." She mounted. He was standing now watching her. "Are you going east," he said, "or south?" She had not decided. Both choices had something wrong with them. "I don't know yet," she said. He nodded. He put his hat on. He swung up into his saddle and the horse stepped sideways once at the movement, and he held it easy and let it settle. They rode south together without discussing it. The line between his way and her way had always been a line on a map, which was to say, not real. The man's name was Devin Marsh, and he found them 2 days later at the Argello camp. Calla heard the dogs first. She came out of the small house into the cold evening air, and the dogs were facing north, stiff-legged, and she did not wait to see what they were facing. She went back inside and picked up her rifle. Cole was at the table. He read her face and stood without speaking. "One rider," she said, "from the north." He was already at the window. The Argello family, the old man, his daughter, her 2 children, were somewhere outside still, and that was a problem. "The children," she said. Cole went out the back without being asked. She heard him call to the children in Spanish, his voice easy, the way you'd call a child in from a game. She heard the children answer and heard their feet on the dirt, and then Cole's voice again, still easy. And then the door opened and they came in, the 2 of them, 7 and 10, and their faces were curious rather than afraid because Cole had done it right, had made it ordinary. She pointed to the corner behind the stove. They went. They were good children. The old man, Argello, came in through the back and looked at her and at the rifle, and at the corner where his grandchildren were sitting, and he took his own rifle from above the door without a word. Cole came in and shut the back door. He had his gun on his hip and he stood beside her at the window. Outside, the rider came into the yard. Marsh was a lean man on a gray horse. He sat the horse well, and he had the kind of stillness that was not peace but calculation. She had known him for 8 months. She knew what he looked like when he was calculating. He looked at the house. "Calla," he called, "I know you're in there." She put her hand flat on the window frame. Cole said low, "You don't have to." "I know," she said. She opened the door and stepped out onto the packed dirt of the yard. The cold hit her face. She kept the rifle at her side, muzzle down. Marsh looked at her and then at the house behind her and back at her. "You've been running a long time," he said. "Not running," she said, "just going." He smiled. It was not a warm smile. "Same thing." "It isn't," she said. "Running is afraid, going is decided." He looked at her for a moment. Then his hand moved toward the rifle on his saddle. She raised hers. The door behind her opened. She heard Cole's feet on the dirt, and then he was beside her, not in front of her, not between her and Marsh, but beside her. The distinction was not small. Marsh looked at Cole. He looked at them standing together. He was calculating again. She could see it. "That your man?" Marsh said to her. She said nothing. Marsh looked at Cole. "You know what she is." "I know who she is," Cole said. "There's a difference." Marsh was quiet. The gray horse shifted and he held it still. He looked at Calla and at the rifle she was holding steady and at the set of her face, which she kept empty and still. He turned the horse. She kept the rifle up until he'd gone 50 yards, then 100, then until he'd dropped below the swell of land to the north. Then she lowered it. Her arms ached. She had not noticed the aching while it was happening. Cole went back inside without speaking. She stood in the yard a moment longer. The dogs were relaxing now, moving away from where they'd been fixed, shaking themselves, beginning to mill. She went inside. The children came out from behind the stove, and the old man put his rifle back above the door, and his daughter came from the back room where she'd gone with her own instinct for survival, and looked at everyone still standing, and said something in Spanish. Cole was at the table again. He poured 2 cups from the coffee that had been sitting on the stove and set one at her place. She sat down. She put both hands around the cup. He didn't ask about Marsh. He didn't ask what came next. He drank his coffee and looked at the middle distance the way a man looked when he was giving someone else room. The coffee was hot and bitter and real. She held the cup and felt the warmth come into her hands.